My name is Alina Ward, and 2 days ago, my mother told me not to wear my uniform, not because it was inappropriate, not because it wasn't clean, but because she didn't want anyone thinking I was someone important. She said it over the phone with the same tone she used to read grocery lists. Level, cold, almost rehearsed. Don't wear the uniform, Alina. We don't want the attention on you. This is Sophie's moment. Sophie, my younger sister, was being promoted this weekend. Lieutenant Commander, Navy Medical Officer. The family was flying out, booking hotels, planning dinner reservations. Every detail was locked in, down to the place cards on the dinner table. They sent me the invite as a formality, and I accepted as a formality, too. But I hadn't seen my family in years. Not since I left for Afghanistan. Not since I came back with a limp in my right leg, a scar across my shoulder, and silence in every voicemail they never returned. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. My army sweatshirt was faded, the sleeves pushed up. DC sunlight slanted across the countertop like it didn't care what kind of family I came from. Fine, I said. I'll wear something simple. Good, my mother replied. You understand. And then she hung up. No, see you soon. No, I'm proud of you. Not even take care. Just a dead line and a long, familiar silence. I set the phone down gently, took a sip of coffee. It was cold now. But I didn't flinch. I didn't let the heat rise in my chest. I didn't tell her that I was the one who trained the trauma team that saved Sophie's unit 3 years ago. That I had taught battlefield medics how to stop hemorrhage with one hand and a tourniquet under fire. That I was the reason Sophie even had the chance to earn this ceremony. Because that would have sounded like pride. And in my family, pride only belonged to the youngest. The perfect one. The one who stayed in line, not the one who joined the army at 17. Not the one who missed Christmases. Not the one who came back with a cane and silence in her eyes. I walked to my bedroom and opened my closet. Inside, the uniform hung untouched, pressed, folded, polished boots tucked beneath it like soldiers waiting for orders. I looked at it for a long time, and then I shut the door, because she was right. This weekend wasn't about me, but that didn't mean I'd disappear. The flight was short. The distance between Washington, D.C., and Charleston wasn't much, an hour and a half in the air. But the space between me and my family, it might as well have been a continent. I hadn't been home in nearly 4 years. The last time I visited, my father asked me to keep my service pistol in the car. Not because of safety, he just thought it might make guests uncomfortable. I didn't argue, I never did. This time I booked a rental. I didn't ask to stay in the house. I didn't even tell them what time I was landing. I just arrived like I always had quietly. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same trimmed lawns, same white porches, same American flags flapping politely in the breeze, except mine was earned. Not bought in a bundle pack from a Memorial Day sale. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the banner. Congratulations, Sophie. Balloons tied to the railing. Blue and gold. Clean, coordinated, military colors, just not mine. I walked to the front door and knocked. It was my father who opened it. Richard Ward, gray-haired, tucked-in polo. Still looked like he was running for HOA president. He blinked like I was unexpected, even though I RSVP'd. Alina, he said, as if my name tasted unfamiliar. I gave a nod. Hi, Dad. He didn't hug me, just stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and something baking, the kind of scent that covers everything unpleasant, like tension and memory. Your room's upstairs. We turned it into a guest space. I nodded again. Of course they had. Every trace of my teenage years was gone. No photos, no medals. No bookshelf with worn army pamphlets I'd secretly read at 16. Instead, beige bedding, framed watercolors. A neatly folded towel at the foot of the bed, like I was some airman guest they weren't sure how to greet. I unpacked in silence. Downstairs, I could hear my mother's voice. Make sure the roast comes out right at 6:30. Sophie likes it medium. Her voice, crisp and sharp, still cut through the floorboards. I didn't go down right away. I needed a moment. because walking back into that house felt like trying to breathe through linen. Clean, white, suffocating. At dinner, the table was set with military precision. Napkins folded like sails, cutlery placed like a navy diagram. And Sophie, of course, sat at the head. All smiles, all gleam, all polished protocol. She looked up when I entered. "Elena," she said warmly, "you came." I nodded, wouldn't miss it. She motioned to the seat farthest from her, so I sat. The conversation flowed, about officers, about career tracks, about bases and deployments. But not mine, only hers. They spoke about Sophie's work like she'd invented the concept of field triage. They didn't ask me a single question about Afghanistan, or the medic unit I'd led through 2 rotations, or the base I'd helped evacuate under fire. At one point, my mother looked at me and said, almost jokingly, "You're so quiet, Elena. I forget you're even here." And I just smiled, because the truth is, they had forgotten me long ago. This dinner wasn't new. It was just another chapter in a family album I never appeared in. But I hadn't come for them. I hadn't come for validation. I'd come because sometimes showing up is the loudest thing you can do, even in silence. Saturday arrived with skies as clear as brass. The ceremony was held at the Naval Base Auditorium, white walls, Navy banners, precision in every corner. Even the folding chairs seemed to stand at attention. I drove myself. No one offered to ride with me, not that I would have said yes. I arrived early, walked past families in pressed suits and floral dresses, children squirming in patent leather shoes. Pride hung in the air like perfume, visible, sweet, heavy. But I carried something else. Not bitterness, not even hope, just presence. I found a seat near the back. 4th row from the exit, easy to leave if I needed to. That's something the Army teaches you, always know your exits. Always sit where you can see the room. The brass band began to play softly near the front. A slow march, ceremonial, my spine straightened instinctively. Old training. Reflexes I hadn't lost, even if I'd tried. I scanned the stage, podium at center, rows of chairs behind it, flag at left, a podium mic with the Navy crest. And then I saw him, Commander Blake Hanford, decorated, tall, poised. He stood like someone who had seen war and didn't flinch. His eyes swept across the crowd like radar, not searching but noting. He would be the one giving Sophie her commissioning. I folded my hands in my lap. They didn't shake. The ceremony began. An announcer stepped forward and welcomed families. Names were read, ranks were honored, achievements listed off like citations on marble. And then her name. Lieutenant Commander Sophie Ward. Applause erupted. I watched her walk down the aisle, chin up, uniform crisp, smile calibrated. She looked perfect. My mother dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. My father stood to clap. His face held a pride I hadn't seen since I was 11 and won a spelling bee. The last time, I think, that I'd made him proud. Sophie ascended the stage and took her place beside Commander Hanford. They shook hands. Cameras flashed. He leaned in and said something. I couldn't hear what, but she laughed, poised and gleaming under the lights. And then, Commander Hanford stepped to the mic. His voice was calm, measured, commanding. It's always a privilege to witness young officers rise through our ranks. Lieutenant Commander Ward exemplifies the discipline and courage this institution demands. Polite applause again, but before we proceed further. He paused, unscripted. I saw it in the way the master of ceremonies blinked. This wasn't in the program. Hanford continued. I was recently reminded that behind every excellent officer, there are mentors, often unseen, often unthanked, sometimes even forgotten by the very families they once protected. The room shifted, still polite, but questioning, and then his eyes moved, past the rows of decorated guests, past the proud parents, past Sophie, whose smile began to falter, until they landed on me, the back row, olive dress, hair tied back, silent. There is one such person here today. She trained the medics who later trained me. She led field extractions under fire, coordinated triage in the dead of night, and wrote protocols I still use with my officers today. Sophie turned, slowly, Would Master Sergeant Alina Ward please stand? It didn't feel real. My name, spoken not like a whisper in a hallway but into a microphone. In a room that never had room for me, I stood, not dramatically, just rose to my feet like I'd done it 1,000 times. He looked directly at me, and then he saluted, a full, formal regulation salute, not casual, not symbolic, genuine, every head turned, gasps, then silence, then the kind of applause that begins as a ripple and becomes something undeniable. My mother's hand stopped mid-clap. My father looked lost, and Sophie, she just stared. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the quiet one. I was the one standing and being seen. The moment passed, but the silence it left behind did not. Commander Hanford lowered his hand. I returned the salute with crisp precision, out of training, out of respect, and maybe out of something deeper, a kind of reclaiming. He nodded once, then turned back to the podium. Let's continue. But nothing really did, not in the way they'd planned. The script resumed, but the room had shifted. People watched Sophie now differently, not with less admiration, but with curiosity. With context, I sat down, calmly, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to them, not to myself. After the ceremony, the lobby buzzed like a beehive, families hugging, flashbulbs popping, laughter echoing against polished tile. I stood near the exit, half in the shadows. Didn't want a scene, didn't need one, but people found me anyway. A young ensign approached first. "Ma'am, you trained in Thunder Ridge, didn't you?" I nodded. He looked down almost shy. "My co used your protocols during a med-evac in Syria. Just wanted to say thank you." He extended his hand. I shook it. Then a woman in her 50s, an officer's wife, walked over and said, "I didn't know Sophie had an older sister. Especially not one like you." Her voice wasn't unkind, just surprised, curious. I gave her a polite smile. Not many people do. More nods, more glances. A few respectful salutes from junior officers who recognized the name now, even if they hadn't before. And then she came. Sophie, still in uniform, still pristine, but the polish had faded from her expression. She walked slowly alone, stopped 2 feet in front of me. Her voice was soft, controlled, like she was trying not to crack her own script. "You didn't tell me." I tilted my head slightly. "Didn't think you were interested." She looked away for a beat, exhaled. "You trained Hanford." I shrugged. Indirectly, field trauma teams. He shadowed one of my units during an exchange rotation. Didn't know he'd be your co. She nodded once, processing. Then her voice shifted, just slightly. "You made me look small today." I met her eyes. No, I didn't say a word. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. She looked like she wanted to say more, maybe argue, maybe apologize, but instead she just said, "They're waiting for me." And she walked away. I didn't follow. Outside, the sun was starting to lower, long golden shadows across the parking lot. My mother was there, arms crossed, waiting by their car like a scene from every holiday I skipped. She saw me, but didn't move, didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared like she was trying to reconcile something she couldn't rewrite. For once, I didn't look away first. She blinked, then turned her back, and that was that. I drove home in silence. No music, no anger, just the kind of quiet that feels earned. Back in DC, I unpacked my dress, hung it neatly, opened my closet and ran a hand along the shoulder of my uniform. Didn't take it out. Didn't need to, but I placed one small thing on the bookshelf near my window, a photo someone had taken after the ceremony. Me, standing, saluting, Commander Hanford mid-gesture. A moment in stillness, recognition, not from the people I'd once tried so hard to impress, but from someone who'd actually seen me. That was enough. That was more than enough. There are medals you wear on your chest, and then there are the ones no one ever pins. The ones earned in silence, earned when you stand alone and still choose not to vanish. Mine was neither gold nor engraved. It came in the form of a moment, a salute that didn't come from obligation, but from recognition. And in that moment, something unlatched inside me. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no follow-up from my parents, no email from Sophie. Not even a forwarded family group text. but I didn't expect one. And strangely, I didn't want one either, because something in me had shifted. That ceremony, it hadn't fixed the past. It hadn't erased the nights I cried in silence during deployment. It hadn't given me back the birthdays missed or the care packages that never came. But it gave me back myself, not the version they shaped, not the version they tried to file down into quiet, but the version who led combat medics in 118 degrees F heat, the version who wrote protocols while her hand trembled from field fatigue, the version who didn't ask to be clapped for, but was still saluted. One morning, I walked into my small study, coffee in hand, sunlight slicing through the blinds like golden ribbons. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a medal, bronze star. No one in my family had ever asked about it. I ran a thumb along its edge. It felt smaller now, not because it had shrunk, but because I had grown. I didn't need to frame it, didn't need to post it. I just set it on the desk beside my coffee mug, a quiet kind of altar. A few days later, an envelope arrived, handwritten, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. Sophie. I opened it slowly, expecting a few lines of apology, or maybe a blank card meant to check some box of politeness. But instead, I found this. I thought I understood what leadership meant. Then I saw a room stop moving when they heard your name. I don't know how I forgot you, but I know I won't again. I'm sorry, Alina, truly. That was it, no signature, no flourish. But it was the first time in 15 years she used the word sorry. I folded the note and placed it next to the bronze star, not to hold on, but to let go. Some people think poetic justice comes in thunder, in revenge, in loud declarations. But sometimes it's just this, a single salute, a sister's quiet letter, and the realization that being overlooked doesn't make you invisible. That weekend, I put on my uniform, not for anyone else. Just for myself, I stood in front of the mirror, straightened the collar, checked the crease, let my reflection settle, and then I whispered something I hadn't said in years. You're still standing.